I married her mother. I thought I could be a good stepfather, but when she turned 19, something changed. She started wearing tighter clothes, she stayed up late when her mother went to sleep, and one night, she walked into my room, and didn't leave. Jonathan stood on the veranda, a glass of scotch in hand, watching the sun bleed into the horizon behind their garden. The house was unusually still, a kind of hush that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Victoria had flown to Rome that morning for a 3-day corporate summit, and now the house was his alone. Until Evie arrived, she was due any minute. And with every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway behind him, Jonathan felt a growing unease settle into his chest. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. More like anticipation. A dangerous, humming sort of curiosity. They hadn't seen each other in nearly a year, not since Evie had stormed out after an argument with her mother and fled to France to study fashion and freedom. As she'd put it, that venture had lasted less than 8 months before she dropped out, and now she was returning home with no degree, no direction, and no apologies that he heard the engine before he saw the car. A silver coupe rolled up the drive. Loud music pulsed from within before the door swung open and silence spilled out, broken only by the soft clink of her boots on the pavement. And then she appeared, Evie.19. Slim. Poised. And devastatingly grown. She wore a black leather jacket over a form-fitting white top, low-rise jeans that hugged her hips, and sunglasses even as dusk settled over the yard. Her hair, deep mahogany and wild from the wind, framed a face that still held the roundness of youth but carried the confidence of someone who'd seen the world and didn't fear it. "Hey, Jonathan," she said coolly as she grabbed her suitcase from the trunk. Jonathan set his glass down on the porch railing. "Evie." She gave him a once-over, lips curving in a smirk. "You haven't changed." "You have," he said before he could stop himself. Her smile deepened. "I know." She swept past him into the house, and the scent of her, jasmine, something musky beneath, lingered in the air long after she vanished up the stairs. That night, Jonathan lay in bed unable to sleep. He heard her pacing in the room down the hall, the sound of her music muffled through the walls, her laughter, soft, private, on the phone. He turned over. Closed his eyes. But images filled the dark behind his lids, her bare shoulders as her jacket slipped off. The sway in her hips, the confidence in her eyes that he cursed himself. This was Evie. His stepdaughter. Barely out of adolescence. And yet, the next morning, she appeared in the kitchen barefoot, in a faded t-shirt that clung to her curves, clearly without a bra. Her hair was wet from the shower, and she moved with the ease of someone who didn't need to ask permission to exist. "Morning," she said, grabbing a mug. "Didn't think you'd be up this early." "I usually am," Jonathan replied, forcing his eyes to stay on her face. Not her chest. Not the bare length of her legs. She sipped coffee. "You always this stiff?" He blinked. "What?" She laughed. "Relax. I'm not here to bite." He turned away. The muscles in his back tight with restraint. Later that day, he found her sunbathing in the backyard. She was wearing a black two-piece that looked more like lingerie than swimwear. Her earbuds were in, eyes closed, completely unaware, or completely aware, of the show she was giving. Jonathan tried not to look. Tried to focus on his book. But he couldn't read the same paragraph 3 times without the words melting into meaningless ink. Finally, she turned her head toward him and pulled out one earbud. "You okay?" she asked, voice slow, teasing. "I should be asking you that." "I'm fine. Just getting some sun. You should join me." "I won't tell Mom." He shook his head, but she just smirked and put her earbuds back in. Turning over to lie on her stomach, the thin straps of her top slipping down her shoulders, that he returned to the study, heart pounding. What was happening? Why did she move like that? Why did he notice? Why did it feel like she wanted to be noticed? That night, he stayed in the study until late, reading and rereading the same page for hours. When he finally emerged, the house was dark, quiet. He paused outside her door. The light was on beneath the frame that he knew he should go to bed, but his hand hovered near the doorknob, then her voice came through, sudden and startling, soft but clear. Are you going to stand there all night? His throat went dry. I heard you, she continued. You've been there 5 minutes. I wasn't, he began, but the word stuck. The door creaked open just an inch. Her eyes peeked through. Come in, she whispered that he should have walked away, but he didn't. The door opened wider with a faint click, spilling warm lamplight into the dim hallway. Jonathan stood frozen, 1 foot hovering over a moral line he had never dared approach before. Inside, Evie leaned against the edge of her bed, wearing only an oversized shirt, Victoria's, unmistakably, and nothing beneath it. If the way the fabric clung to her hips was any sign, I couldn't sleep, she said, brushing a hand through her damp hair. The room feels too quiet. It's like the walls are listening. Jonathan's voice was tight. Evie, this isn't, relax. She rolled her eyes, patting the bed beside her. We're just talking. You act like I'm going to eat you. That smile, half challenge, half invitation, was a trap. And Jonathan knew it. But even knowing didn't make it easier to resist that he stepped inside, keeping his back straight, hands stuffed into his pockets. It's late. You should rest. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. And yet you're the one standing at my door. I wasn't, he stopped. No point lying. She saw right through it. Have a seat. Her voice dropped an octave. You look nervous. I'm not your student. You don't need to be so careful. I'm your stepfather, he said, the word like sand in his mouth. She shrugged. And I'm a grown woman. I've slept with older men. One of them was my professor. Jonathan winced. Evie. She laughed softly, curling her legs beneath her on the bed. Relax, I'm not confessing a sin. I just don't believe in pretending. He sat, but on the chair near the window instead of the bed. It felt safer, marginally. Evie watched him closely. Do I make you uncomfortable? Yes, he said without hesitation. She smiled wider. Good. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, a slow rustle like whispers through the dark. Inside, the room smelled of shampoo and something distinctly hers, sweet, like vanilla and smoke. You always act like the good guy, she said suddenly, her voice thoughtful. Even at dinner, when Mom talks, you nod and listen and say all the right things. But I don't think you're all that good. Jonathan's jaw tightened. And what gives you that impression? The way you look at me, she said softly. You think I don't notice? He stood abruptly. This conversation is over. But she didn't flinch. She rose slowly and moved toward him, bare feet silent on the carpet. You think I'm playing games, don't you? Aren't you? Evie stopped just inches from him. Her scent enveloped him, and he had to fight the urge to step back. Or forward. I don't need to play games, Jonathan. I know exactly what I want. And what is that? Her lips curved. Sometimes, it's just fun to see how far someone will go to get it. Jonathan clenched his fists. You're pushing boundaries you don't understand. She reached out, slow, deliberate, and placed her fingers on his chest. Oh, I understand. His breath caught. The room pulsed around them. You're not the only one tempted, she whispered. Jonathan stepped back, breath sharp. I'm going to bed. Suit yourself. She turned away, crawling back onto the bed with deliberate ease. The shirt rose over the curve of her thighs as she stretched. But don't lie to yourself, Jonathan. You'll be back. He left the room, closing the door a little too hard behind him. The next day was colder, overcast. Rain tapped softly at the windows. Jonathan avoided her. He buried himself in his study, answering emails, pretending he had work that couldn't wait, but she was everywhere, in the hallway in just a towel, hair dripping down her back that eye and the kitchen in his shirt and nothing else, biting into strawberries like it was an erotic ritual that he tried not to look. Failed.by afternoon, she cornered him. You're avoiding me, she said, arms crossed as she leaned against the doorway. I'm trying to give you space. Don't lie. You're afraid. Of what? He asked, knowing full well, she stepped forward. That you'll lose control. Their eyes locked. For the briefest second. It was mutual, acknowledgement, desire, danger. He turned away. I made vows, Evie. She moved in closer, her voice against his ear. And so did my mother. To my real father. It hit like a slap that he snapped. This ends now. No, she said, brushing her lips just barely against his cheek. It's only just begun. He stormed out of the house and walked through the rain, trying to calm the fire in his blood. But temptation had already breached the walls. The game had started. And it was no longer clear who was chasing whom. Jonathan's footsteps echoed on the rain-slick pavement as he wandered aimlessly through the streets, the cold drizzle seeping through his coat and chilling him to the bone. The evening was gray and bleak, the sky a low ceiling of clouds pressing down on the town like a weight. Yet, the storm inside him raged far fiercer than the one brewing overhead. He had always prided himself on self-control, on a firm moral compass that guided his every step. But now, with Evie's smoldering presence infiltrating every corner of his life, those boundaries seemed fragile, trembling under the pressure of something raw, dangerous, and utterly forbidden. His mind replayed the previous days in agonizing detail, the way she'd looked at him with that mixture of challenge and invitation, the softness of her voice when she whispered his name, the way her fingers had grazed his chest as if to mark him. These were not innocent moments. These were acts of seduction, thinly veiled behind youthful defiance and a reckless game of power, and yet, part of him craved it. Jonathan stopped beneath a street lamp, the halo of yellow light casting long shadows across his face. His breath formed clouds in the damp air as he grappled with the dizzying confusion that had taken hold of him. Was it lust? Or something deeper, more twisted? Was he falling into a pit from which there was no return? Back at home, the house felt unbearably silent. He remembered the way Evie had looked at him that night, the way she had dared him to cross the line. She wasn't just teasing. She was probing, testing how far he would go, whether the man who'd once been so composed could be broken down by temptation. Jonathan's phone buzzed suddenly, jolting him from his thoughts. It was a message from Victoria. Miss you. Hope you're keeping the house in order. Evie should settle in soon. He stared at the screen, the words like a cold splash of reality. Victoria trusted him to be a husband, a father figure, a protector. And yet, with Evie in the house, those roles became tangled. Blurred beyond recognition that he put the phone away and made his way back home, the rain having eased into a gentle mist. Inside the house, Evie awaited him in the living room, perched on the arm of the sofa with a knowing smile that unsettled him. She was dressed casually but provocatively, a sheer blouse that left little to the imagination, and jeans that hugged her long legs like a second skin. Back so soon? She teased, patting the spot beside her. Jonathan hesitated, then sat down with a sigh, his heart pounding in his chest. I can't keep doing this, he said quietly. This game you're playing, it's dangerous. Is it? She murmured, tilting her head. Or maybe it's the only way to find out what's real. Their eyes met, and Jonathan felt the last vestiges of his resistance crumble. Before he knew it, his hand was reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. The contact was electric, sending a thrill through both of them. Evie. He began, voice thick with emotion. She leaned into his touch, her breath warm against his skin. Don't stop. Jonathan's lips found hers in a kiss that was hesitant at first, then deepened with growing urgency. The room seemed to dissolve around them, leaving only the two of them caught in a whirlwind of desire and forbidden longing. His hands traced the curve of her back, pulling her closer as she responded with equal fire. The years of restraint melted away as they gave in to the tempest that had been simmering beneath the surface. Yet, even in the midst of passion, a voice in Jonathan's mind screamed warnings, reminders of the consequences, the shattered trust, the irreparable damage, but the storm inside was deafening, drowning out reason with every heated touch, every whispered confession. As dawn approached, they lay entwined, the weight of what had happened settling like a fragile secret between them. Evie's fingers traced idle patterns on his chest as she whispered, "This changes everything." Jonathan nodded, conflicted and overwhelmed. "Yes. But it doesn't have to destroy us." She smiled softly. "Maybe not. But it will change the rules." And with that, the first chapter of their forbidden story closed, leaving them both suspended between desire and destruction. Temptation and regret. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room in warm hues of gold and rose. Jonathan woke with a start, the tangled sheets and Evie's presence beside him a vivid reminder of the night's irrevocable crossing. His heart hammered painfully in his chest, a mixture of exhilaration and dread swirling inside him. Evie was still asleep, her breathing slow and steady, the curve of her bare shoulder visible above the sheets. For a moment, Jonathan allowed himself to simply look, the contours of her youthful face, the way the sunlight caught her hair, the softness of her skin. It was beautiful, fragile, and utterly forbidden. He slipped quietly from the bed, careful not to wake her. In the quiet of the early morning, his mind raced with questions and fears. What would Victoria say if she knew? What would this do to their fractured family? Was this merely a fleeting lapse, or the beginning of something far more dangerous? The day that followed was a fragile dance of avoidance and stolen glances. Jonathan buried himself in his work, desperate to reclaim control. Evie, however, seemed untouched by guilt, her boldness only growing with every encounter. At lunch, she appeared in the kitchen wearing a loose shirt that left little to the imagination. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. "Morning," she said with a smirk, leaning casually against the counter. Jonathan swallowed hard. "Evie, we need to talk." She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About us. What happened last night?" She shrugged, the carefree attitude infuriating him. "It happened. Now what?" He took a deep breath. "It can't happen again." Her eyes darkened with a mixture of amusement and challenge. "You're the one who crossed the line." "Maybe. But I'm also the one who knows it's wrong." "Wrong?" She laughed, a low, sultry sound. "Who decides what's wrong, Jonathan? Your wife? Society? Or maybe you?" His jaw clenched. "I decide what I can live with." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Then what do you want?" Jonathan closed his eyes, fighting the temptation that surged like wildfire through his veins. "I want to protect her. And you. From this." "But you're not protecting anything," she said softly. "You're letting yourself fall." That night, the lines blurred further. Alone in the living room, a rainstorm thrummed against the windows as thunder rolled overhead. The electricity in the air mirrored the storm outside, intensifying the charged atmosphere between them. Evie approached him slowly, her eyes burning with desire and something deeper, a yearning for connection and escape. Jonathan wanted to resist. Wanted to walk away, but his body betrayed him. Their lips met again, this time with a hunger that consumed the last traces of doubt. Clothes fell away, skin met skin, and the boundaries of their relationship dissolved in a frenzy of heat and need. In those moments, there was only them, the ache, the pleasure, the dangerous dance of two souls entwined against the world. When dawn broke, Jonathan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The weight of their actions pressed down on him, crushing and relentless. He knew the path ahead would be treacherous, filled with lies, secrets, and heartbreak, but the storm inside him had been unleashed. And there was no turning back. The days after their night together seemed to stretch endlessly, each one marked by a fragile attempt at normalcy that neither Jonathan nor Evie could truly maintain. The weight of their secret hung heavily between them, unspoken but ever present, casting shadows over every glance and word exchanged. Jonathan found himself walking a precarious tightrope, balancing the roles of husband, stepfather, and secret lover. At times, the strain felt unbearable, twisting his insides into knots of guilt and desire. He could no longer ignore the whispering voice of conscience that begged him to stop before everything unraveled. Evie, on the other hand, wore her secret like armor, her confidence growing with each stolen moment. She moved through the house with a boldness that both thrilled and terrified Jonathan. Sometimes, late at night, he would catch her watching him with those dark, knowing eyes that seemed to say, "I own you now." One afternoon, Jonathan was preparing a lecture when his phone buzzed. A message from Victoria appeared. "How is Evie settling in? I want to make sure she's comfortable. Don't hesitate to tell me if she needs anything." He stared at the screen, the image of his wife's trusting face a stark contrast to the tangled reality. His fingers trembled as he typed a brief reply, assuring her all was well, but beneath the surface, a storm was gathering. Evie was in her room when Jonathan knocked softly on the door. He entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee, his hands shaking slightly. "I thought you might want a break," he said, setting a cup beside her on the bed. She looked up, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Thanks." They sat in silence for a moment, the tension thick. "Jonathan," she began, voice low, "we can't keep hiding like this." He sighed heavily. "I know. But what choice do we have?" Her smile faded. "We make our own choices." His heart pounded. "Victoria deserves the truth." She laughed bitterly. "And you think she'll understand?" "I have to try." Evie reached out, fingers grazing his cheek. "Be careful what you wish for." That evening, Jonathan confronted Victoria. The conversation was painful and raw, tears, accusations, and heartbreak mingling in a fragile dance of emotions. Victoria's world shattered in that moment, the betrayal cutting deeper than words could express. Yet, beneath her pain lay a fierce resolve. "This can't continue," she said quietly. "For all our sakes." Jonathan nodded, feeling the weight of her forgiveness and the heavy burden of his own choices. Back at home, the tension between Jonathan and Evie intensified. The secrecy that once fueled their passion now threatened to consume them. One night, as rain hammered against the windows, they found themselves alone in the study, the flickering fire casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Evie stepped close, her voice a whisper. "Do you regret it?" Jonathan's gaze was steady. "I don't know." She smiled sadly. "Neither do I." Their lips met, hesitant but desperate, a final act of surrender to the storm they had unleashed. The house felt colder now, though the days were growing warmer. Jonathan could feel the fracture lines deepening between the people he once thought he could protect, between Victoria, Evie, and himself. Each relationship twisted and cracked under the strain of their secrets and desires, threatening to shatter completely. Victoria had retreated into herself, her once vibrant presence now shadowed by hurt and suspicion. She no longer smiled freely, her eyes held a guarded wariness whenever Jonathan was near. She spoke little of Evie, but Jonathan knew the silence was heavier than any accusation. Evie, for her part, was a tempest. Wild, unpredictable, and fierce, she oscillated between tender moments and fiery defiance. She seemed to crave Jonathan's attention even as she pushed him away, testing the limits of his loyalty and patience. Jonathan was caught in the middle, a man torn by conflicting emotions. Guilt, passion, and a desperate hope to somehow salvage what remained of his fractured family. One evening, Victoria invited Jonathan to dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. The atmosphere was tense, the polite conversation masking the undercurrents of pain and suspicion. "Jonathan," she began softly, "we need to talk about Evie." He nodded, bracing himself. "What about her?" "She's slipping away from me," Victoria confessed, eyes glistening. "And I don't know how to reach her anymore." Jonathan's heart ached. "I know she's difficult right now, but she needs us both." Victoria sighed. "I want to believe that. But I'm scared of what she's becoming, and what this means for us." Jonathan reached across the table. Taking her hand. We'll find a way. Together. But back home, the cracks grew wider. One afternoon, Jonathan returned early from work to find Evie packing a bag. The expression on her face was defiant, but beneath it lay a raw vulnerability. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice tight. "To clear my head," she replied without looking up. Jonathan stepped closer. "Evie, please. Don't do this." She met his gaze, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I have to. Before I lose myself completely." Jonathan wanted to reach out, to hold her, but the lines between them felt impossibly tangled. That night, alone in his study, Jonathan wrestled with his conscience. The man he had been, the man he wanted to be, and the man he had become collided in a storm of regret and longing that he knew the path ahead would be perilous, filled with broken trust, shattered dreams, and painful choices, but in the depths of his soul, a flicker of hope remained. Hope that love, even fractured and flawed, could find a way to heal. The tension that had silently accumulated within the walls of the house finally reached a boiling point on a stormy evening that seemed to echo the turmoil in Jonathan's heart. Thunder growled overhead as rain lashed against the windows, creating a chaotic symphony that matched the chaos unraveling inside. Jonathan stood in the kitchen, the cold ceramic cup in his hand trembling slightly. Across from him, Evie sat on the counter, eyes dark and defiant, daring him to break the fragile truce they'd maintained. "We can't keep pretending," she said, her voice low but unwavering. This mess we're in, it's out in the open whether we say it or not." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that? Every day, every hour I'm fighting the consequences of what we did." Evie laughed bitterly. "Then stop fighting and accept it." He shook his head, exhaustion etched deep into his features. "I won't let this destroy my family." "Your family," she echoed, the words dripping with sarcasm. "You mean the one you share with Mom? Or the one you've been building with me?" Jonathan's breath caught. "Evie, don't," but she was already standing, moving toward the door. "I'm leaving. Tonight." The words hit him like a slap, reverberating through the room. "No." She paused, hand on the doorknob, eyes blazing. "You want to hold on to what's left? Then stop lying, to me, to her, to yourself." And with that, she was gone, leaving Jonathan alone with the storm raging inside and outside. Jonathan's mind raced as he paced the empty rooms of the house. The fragile balance had shattered, and with it, the last threads of hope he'd clung to. He knew Victoria was hurting, but he also knew Evie was slipping away into a darkness he might never reach. He sank into the study chair, burying his face in his hands. The weight of his choices pressed down relentlessly. Just then, his phone vibrated. A message from Evie: "I'm sorry. I have to find myself again. Don't wait for me." Tears blurred his vision. He wanted to shout, to beg her to stay, but the words stuck in his throat. The breaking point had come. There was no turning back. The following days were a haze of phone calls, unanswered messages, and sleepless nights. Jonathan and Victoria tried to hold their fractured family together, but the cracks were too deep. At one point, Victoria confronted him with quiet resolve. "We have to decide what comes next, for all our sakes." Jonathan nodded, knowing that the choices ahead would define the rest of their lives. Late one evening, as the rain finally ceased, Jonathan found himself standing at the edge of the garden, staring into the darkened sky. The storm inside him had calmed, but the scars remained. He whispered to the night, "Forgive me." The silence that settled over the house was thick, heavy with things unsaid and wounds still fresh. Evie's absence echoed through every room, her laughter, her scent, the sharp glint in her eyes, all now ghosts in the fabric of their fractured home. Jonathan moved through the days like a man lost in a fog, haunted by memories and haunted by choices. He tried to reconnect with Victoria, but the distance between them had grown too vast, filled with pain and broken trust. One evening, alone in his study, Jonathan's thoughts spiraled back to Evie, to the heat of her touch, the reckless abandon of their forbidden moments, and the ache of what had been lost. Desire was a double-edged sword, cutting both ways, leaving scars as well as memories. his phone buzzed quietly. A message from an unknown number appeared. "I miss you. Can we talk?" His breath caught. The message was from Evie. Later that night, they met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, the dim lighting casting soft shadows over their faces. Evie looked different, softer, more vulnerable, but the spark in her eyes remained. "Why did you come back?" Jonathan asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I had to," she replied, reaching for his hand across the table. "Leaving wasn't the answer. I was running from everything, from myself, from you, from the mess we made." Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. "It's not easy to fix what's broken." "No," she agreed, "but maybe it's possible." They talked for hours, unraveling the tangled threads of their relationship, the lust, the guilt, the love, and the pain. The boundaries between stepfather and stepdaughter blurred once more, but now tempered with honesty and a fragile hope. Back at home, Victoria sensed the shift, though she knew little of their meeting. Her eyes held a mix of sadness and strength, the kind forged through fire. Jonathan realized then that the path ahead would require more than passion. It would demand courage, forgiveness, and the willingness to face the consequences of their desires. That night, as Jonathan lay in bed, memories of Evie's touch lingered on his skin, a bittersweet reminder of a love that defied convention but burned with undeniable truth. The morning light spilled unevenly through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room where Jonathan sat alone. His thoughts churned relentlessly as the weight of what was to come settled heavily on his shoulders. The fragile peace he and Evie had tentatively begun to forge was about to be tested, not by desire, but by truth. Jonathan had made the hardest decision yet. He would tell Victoria everything, the secret they had buried, the night stolen away, the tangled web of emotions and betrayal. All of it needed to be laid bare. No more lies. No more silences. Only the reckoning that he found Victoria in the kitchen, her face pale and drawn from restless nights. Her eyes, though weary, held a quiet strength that both comforted and terrified him. "Victoria," Jonathan began, his voice faltering. "We need to talk." She nodded, bracing herself as he recounted the entire truth, every stolen glance, every whispered temptation, every moment where control had slipped away. Tears welled in her eyes, but she listened. Her hands clasped tightly together. When he finished, the room was heavy with silence. "I trusted you," she said quietly, voice trembling. "And you betrayed me." Jonathan's heart shattered anew. "I'm sorry. More than I can say." Victoria stood, wrapping herself in a shawl as if to shield from the pain. "I need time. Time to think, to heal." Jonathan nodded. "I understand." The days that followed were cold and distant. Victoria withdrew into herself, leaving Jonathan to grapple with the consequences of his actions alone. Evie returned home quietly, aware that the family they once were might never be the same. The secret was no longer theirs to carry alone, it was a burden shared, a fracture that could no longer be hidden. One evening, Jonathan found himself sitting by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, lost in thought. The flames flickered, shadows dancing on the walls like ghosts of the past that he whispered into the dark. "What have I done?" Victoria entered the room silently, her presence both a balm and a reminder. "We have to decide," she said softly. "Whether we rebuild or let go." Jonathan looked up, hope and fear mingling in his eyes. "We'll find a way," he promised. Together. The days turned slowly into weeks, each one a step into unfamiliar territory for Jonathan, Victoria, and Evie. The house that had once echoed with laughter and now trembled beneath the weight of betrayal began to stir again, cautiously. Hesitantly, with the fragile hope of healing, Jonathan found himself standing in the quiet garden one early morning, the first light brushing the leaves with soft gold. The cool air was refreshing, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. He took a deep breath, willing himself to release the past and look forward. Victoria joined him, her expression serene but unreadable. For the first time in months, they spoke without bitterness or accusation. "We can't erase what happened," she said softly, "but maybe we can learn to live beyond it." He nodded, grateful for her strength and her willingness to try. Evie was somewhere between them, no longer the rebellious stepchild, but a young woman seeking her own path. The tension that once defined their relationship had eased into a complicated understanding. In the quiet moments, Jonathan reflected on the journey, the forbidden desire, the mistakes, the secrets that almost destroyed them. He understood now that temptation was a force that could consume, but also one that taught hard lessons about human fragility and the capacity to forgive. Their story was far from perfect, scarred by passion and pain. But in those scars lay the possibility of growth, redemption, and new beginnings. One afternoon, the three of them shared a tentative meal together. The conversation was light, cautious smiles exchanged, the first true connection since everything had changed. Jonathan caught Victoria's eye and saw a flicker of hope there. Evie laughed softly at something he said, the sound genuine and warm. In that moment, the past felt distant, a shadow that no longer controlled them. Jonathan knew the road ahead would not be easy. The temptations, the mistakes, the emotional storms had forever altered their lives, but they had chosen to face it, to confront the consequences and find a way forward. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the horizon, Jonathan whispered a silent promise to himself, to live honestly, to love carefully, and to cherish the fragile bonds that held them together. No longer defined by temptation, but strengthened by the courage to begin anew.